So let's talk about some data from the front lines of the Great Expansion. Which Tau Empire units are strongest in current Warhammer 40k? Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Tau, and we're going to be taking a look at the strongest units in the army and what makes them good. Currently in Warhammer, I'd say that Tau are doing pretty well in Arks of Omen right now. The latest season of the game brought a few nerfs to certain units such as Crisis Suits and Commanders, plus Kroot and Sunsharks didn't have such a great time of it either, the latter due to the aircraft nerf. In terms of the overall army strength, they're doing kind of fine really, around about a 48% win percentage in Arks of Omen, pretty standard for 40k armies to be honest. Maybe a little bit down on their 51% or so that they had in Nephilim, but they are still topping grand tournaments, showing that they can compete at the highest level. With the points changes and a new meta, I was interested to see what units people were using and are doing well in their top placing lists currently. With that in mind, like a couple of similar videos I've done recently, I thought we'd take a look at some tournament data to see what people are using. I looked at 23 high placing Tau army lists, ones that are winning the majority of their games, either going 4 wins to 1 loss or better at a grand tournament, or winning 3 out of their 3 games at a small tournament. For showing which units are basically auto-including competitive armies, I thought we'd go through in order of how many times units were selected, so how many lists out of 23 they happen to appear in. Obviously it's just one way to look at things, but I think it's a very helpful one to be honest. It showcases which units are taken by the top armies in good numbers. I thought today we'd focus on the top 10 placing units, but here are just a few honourable mentions that didn't quite make it into the main list. All of these were taken at 3 or more times in the top 23 lists. 3 lists took Vespid Stingwings, Shadow Sun or Broadsides. Stingwings can be useful for secondaries, broadsides still do okay raw firepower, maybe particularly with rail rifles and plasma rifles perhaps. I'm perhaps surprised to see Shadow Sun quite so low though. I guess she's just quite a lot harder to include structurally in a list. Now you can't take the Supreme Command attachment in Arks of Omen, she will be competing against the other standard Tau commanders. Either 4 or 5 lists took the Ghost Kill Battlesuit or the Sunshark Bomber. I feel like perhaps the Sunshark might be a bit of a carryover from being quite so popular in Nephilim. It has to come down turn 2 now, but I guess its firepower on the Alpha Strike isn't awful, and if it does survive to deliver a bombing run, then it will be very good value. Ghost kills were often included just one of them in an army, perhaps just as an annoying durable threat to put on a far-flung objective. Not being able to be shot at long range is quite an asset I guess, even if its damage output isn't superb. Finally, and just very narrowly missing out on the top rankings, 6 or 7 lists took Kroot Carnivores, Akada Fireblade, or Commander Farsight himself. It seems that the standard Kroot are being outcompeted by both Fire Warriors and Kroot Hounds, now they went up to 7 points. I don't really know why Games Workshop made that change, but they're still not unplayable in small numbers for OBSEC screening. Akada Fireblade is having a bit of a return to form, seeing as Fire Warriors are being taken more now. He does give decent buffs to them, plus a Marker Light, so if you've got a reasonable amount in a list, he's really not the worst choice for HQ for a small amount of points. And I think that you could argue that Commander Farsight might well deserve a spot on the top 10 list. Top armies tended to be split around 50-50 between Farsight Enclave and Tau Empire lists, so his prevalence really is quite big in any list that took the Enclaves. A little bit of powerful melee plus a decent plasma rifle does fine, plus the normal Crisis Commander buffs I suppose. It seems that he's seen as a pretty reasonable choice for the Farsight lists, even in competition with the great Crisis Commander builds that they can make just on their own steam. He's definitely going to be a bit underrated by this metric, so you could easily put him in the top 10. Moving on to the top 10 list of Tau units proper though, in joint 10th place we had 2 different units, and first up we had the Marker Light providing Tau Pathfinders. These are a fast attack choice, 90 points for a unit of 10 of them, a bit more fragile than regular Fire Warriors due to a 5+ save and costing more points. These are the guys who can provide a whole ton of Marker Lights to an army if you need them, being able to move and mark, and then with a stratagem if you want to preserve the unit and not have it exposed to enemy fire, you can have 1 command point to move again after you've done that, potentially hopping back behind cover. They can also get into the midfield early if you need them to, though I think are fairly expensive to have as frontline screening infantry, and you can take a whole bunch of special weapons in them if you want to, meaning that the damage output really isn't too bad for the cost, even if they are fairly fragile. Both the ion rifle and the rail rifle are fairly intimidating for the extra 5-point cost. The majority of lists just seem to use them as just the one unit as a high investment unit to get a whole bunch of Marker Lights on the board. A couple of lists loaded up on the special weapons with the ion and the rail rifles, though it seems that more of them just wanted to go bare bones and keep them cheap for marking. Also in joint 10th position are the various flavours of Ethereal. Again, kind of similar to Commander Farsight, they will be a bit underranked by this metric, as you can't take them in the Farsight Enclave lists, so that will reduce the amount of times that they'd be taken on this list overall. As a proportion of lists that could take them, they'd be a lot higher up, I suppose. The Ethereals are the supporting HQ choices that don't really do all that much in terms of melee or damage. They typically provide a couple of invocations each turn, often giving a big unit of crisis suits or similar a 5+ feel no pain, and also rustling up a command point each turn. The most popular Ethereal being taken was the standard one, often on a hover drone, and they'd often take the humble stave to make sure that their invocations go off reliably, plus they get 2 of them. Ornvar was another really quite popular pick, a little bit slower but a bit more tough, plus not having to spend a relic for the stave is handy. Overall pretty good value out of these, and they can be interesting models to do actions as well, while being screened by other units and doing their main buffs in the command phase. In 9th place on the list, it's quite nice to see the return of the Humble Strike team to competitive play. In Nephilim and previously, the standard Fire Warriors were very rarely seen, often just outcompeted by Kroot Carnivores to fill the troops' tax for minimum amounts of points. The Strike team are standard Fire Warriors with Pulse Rifles, 80 points for a unit of 10, Toughness 3 Infantry with a 4+ save, and armed with the Pulse Rifle, Rapid Fire 1, Strength 5 and AP -1, quite good at taking chunks out of most things. They've also got rather nice supporting stratagems as well, multiple different ways that they can get extra damage on those rifles, plus can reduce charge distance with their grenades. Lists never really went too heavy on these, even with their advantages they're not the best damage dealers in the codex. They're usually just cheap bare bones squads to hold down objectives with objectives secured, plus lay down a bit of firepower while they do so. A couple of squads of them used either marker drones or marker lights, and they were often supported by Carder Fireblades who worked rather well with them, making their shooting significantly nastier. It seems that people still want objectives secured on the board, and now crews are up at 70-point squads. It looks like it's tipped the balance, and these guys are being favoured more. Even without their pre-game move, their raw damage and defence is just seen as superior. In any case, it's pretty nice to see an iconic unit being used quite so much, even in Arks of Omen when troops aren't mandatory. Only just nosing ahead of them, and in joint 7th place are the Breacher team, the other flavour of Fire Warriors, 85 points per unit, and basically equipped with closer range pulse weapons. Their pulse blasters, when you get into range, gets 2 shots at strength 6, AP -2. Typically these guys were just about always fielded in Devilfish, though a couple of units started on the board. They are pretty much the ideal units to be hopping out of Devilfish, getting them close to where they need to be to lay down fire support and claim the objectives with their troops rules. These guys were basically always in bare bones squads, focusing on the raw power of their pulse blasters, and they can get some interesting fire support stratagems like re-rolling wounds up close, which is pretty nasty on that generalist profile. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the unit that they were in joint 7th place with 12 selections also, were the Devilfish. These guys are nice and dependable premium tower firepower, with 13 wounds apiece at toughness 7 for 95 points. That really isn't too bad. I feel like they're perhaps a little bit better in Montcar maybe. Their armoured aggression rule with that allows them to get a pre-game move before the first turn begins, really quite handy for getting the breaches where they need to be early and claiming those objectives and ramming those pulse blasters into the enemy troops. Perhaps their biggest deal though is their stratagem when you're in your tactical philosophy, you can zoom them up the board and then disembark the Fire Warriors after. This is perhaps the single best thing with Breachers, as it gives them a pretty enormous threat range, both for getting to objectives and getting those blasters in range. I say this is maybe one of the best reasons to take Devilfish, giving you a genuinely better strike range from the transport. For the most part, these things just seem to be kept cheap. You could upgrade the smart missiles if you wanted to, and I don't think it would be terrible, but lots of people just seem to stick with the standard burst cannon and gun drones and focus on them being kind of expendable. Moving on and focusing on the hovering tower tanks, we have the Hammerhead. These were taken in 13 out of the 23 lists, so we're getting into selections that were taken most of the time now, and Hammerheads are 145 points with the scary railgun. None of the lists took the iron cannon whatsoever. They're pretty badly balanced with the extra 10 points there. Hammerheads have got okay but not standout toughness, 14 wounds at toughness 7 but no imball save, not too hard to gun down in 9th edition. But while they do remain on the board, the railguns are pretty terrifying to any army that's got a decent amount of heavy hitters. A single shot with strength 14, AP -6, and damage D3 +6 plus mortal wounds, cutting straight through invul saves. They're a lot better in both Tau Sept and Farsight Enclaves as well. The Hammerhead's targeting array allows you to re-roll the hit roll and both of those sets would allow you to reroll the wound roll as well, giving you a very reliable single punch. On top of that, you either have burst cannons, gun drones, or smart missiles, all of which were taken at least a little bit. I feel like the burst cannons and the gun drones were the more popular choices out of the two, either keeping cheap or just going for some fairly serious anti-infantry fire within 18 inches. A couple did also pick up a fairly punchy Seeker missile as well for 5 points, maybe not terrible on the Alpha Strike, and perhaps a bit more efficient on Hammerheads in general, as if you don't use the reroll on the big railgun, you might be able to use it on the Seeker missile and still get good value for it there. You do also have the submunition stratagem, which can help out quite well against hordes, a decent amount of mortal wounds there if the enemy is massing up infantry. With a fair few of the other mainline damage dealers in the Tau army having had nerfs since the Codex came out, the Hammerheads are standing out a bit more perhaps. Some lists take a full 3 of these, others just 1 or 2 backing up other assets like Riptides. Moving onwards and slightly upwards, in joint 4th place we have 2 units, the first of which being the Stealth Suit team. Stealth Suits are 25 points per model and mini Battlesuits, toughness 4 and 2 wounds with a 3+ save, and a helpful durability trick in their camouflage fields to get them -1 to hit, and bonuses when they're in cover. Generally in armies they don't tend to be taken in excess, maybe just 1 or 2 units to start up the board as infiltrators, hunkering down on objectives, or maybe being in the right place to do actions and things, such as those aerospace targeting relays. Generally people tended to keep them cheap just with burst cannons for a bit of an Assault 6 anti-infantry punch. I didn't really see anyone using the fusion blasters at all, though a couple picked up homing beacons to allow you to do that deep strike manoeuvre with the crisis suits, jumping some suits down turn 1 for a big alpha strike. That can potentially be quite nice in Farside enclaves where they have the big stratagem and 4 mad rerolls. They also have a 1 command point Wall of Mirrors stratagem that allows them to return to reserve as well. That can potentially be very helpful for later game objectives and things, potentially jumping around into the opponent's deployment zone for behind enemy lines perhaps, or just getting the jump on some enemy infantry that should otherwise be safe. Not a unit that you really want to go too heavy on, but quite appropriately fill their role as scouts and outriders, doing objectives and getting places where the enemy doesn't want them. Maybe in a similar sort of utility role, in joint 4th we also have the Kroot Hound unit. I'm not really too surprised to see these guys get even more popular after Arks of Omen's updates, nerfing Kroot. It just seems to put these guys even further ahead. Just 6 point per model little models that you can take in units of 4, so just 24 points for an annoyance unit that can pre-game move up the board. They move 12 inches as well and can re-roll advances, so if you just want them in one place they're going to be quite easily able to rush over to objectives, potentially try and hide out of line of sight. And at just 24 points they're cheap enough just to literally use as move blocking the enemy army, or even just board control and sacrificial deep strike screens that you don't really care whether they die or not, but maybe might prevent the enemy from getting places on the board and striking at the core of your force. If you do have the free fast attack slots, I think they're rarely going to be a bad choice for a Tau army. 1 or 2 units will usually help out in game terms, even if they're not going to be carrying much damage dealing. For the list that I looked at, no one chose to build out beyond 4 model units, and there's often 2 or 3 units in a list to be annoying disruptors and distractors. Getting into the most auto-include Tau units though, in 3rd place we have the Crisis Battlesuit team, arguably the most iconic unit in the whole codex perhaps. 45 points per model elite infantry with their jetpacks, zooming around the board at 10 inches per turn, potentially advancing if they need to, and laying down a bunch of firepower with a vast array of flexible guns. For their points cost, perhaps the most common selections at the moment are things like plasma rifles, cyclic ion blasters, and burst cannons. I feel like maybe you get the most bang for your buck out of those 3. Though I'd argue that literally every single one of the different weapon options is usable in the right circumstances, depending on what you want for the unit. Missile pods allow a bit more skirmishing at range, the airburst could pay a bit of a premium for a touch of ignores line of sight firepower, and tower flamers are very solid against infantry but do require getting close. In general, people didn't usually tend to double up on the weapons, maybe occasionally on the plasma rifles, the increasing points cost if you do just being seen as a bit too steep a price to pay. Typically these were paired with either shield generators for the 4+ invul save, paying the 5 point premium, or the target locks for some ignores cover goodness. To add a bit of durability to the unit, the Iridium suit was quite a common pickup, sometimes paired with a stim injector for a 5+ feel no pain on 1 unit per game, and perhaps having 1 or 2 shield drones to eat some of the very biggest hits. Crisis suits have gone up in points a couple of times since the codex dropped, and now at the stage where I think that usually to justify them you want to be building around them with their core synergies, putting on nice buffs from their crisis commanders and warlord traits. Most army lists tended to field 1 or 2 biggish units, usually of 5 suits plus some drone support, back them up with commanders with some appropriate warlord traits to up their firepower yet more. I suspect they might have been thinking about jump shoot jumping around the board. Being able to shoot but hide behind cover after they've shot is quite a big deal. They're quite nice for the ethereal buff for the 5+ feel no pain as well, if they are going to be taking damage. Overall a very solid unit, but maybe not quite as much absolutely auto-include as it has been when the codex first dropped. Currently though, it does seem like the most auto-include out of the mainline damage dealers of the Tau does appear to be the Riptide Battlesuit once more. It does seem a bit overly common that the best thing in Tau competitive lists often tends to pivot back to triple Riptides with enormous regularity. The Riptide Battlesuit is the big tough heavy support suit of the Tau Empire. Really quite durable with 14 wounds, a 2+ armor save, and a great big shield generator to give it a 4+ invul. It does have quite a steep points cost though, at 240 points base, and an extra 10 points for the Ion Accelerator, which basically everyone seems to take. When overcharged, the Ion Accelerator goes to Strength 8, AP 3, and a flat damage of 4. 6 shots with that, with a bit of Markerite support, is generally going to be bad news for any heavy hitter that it points it at, and then it gets a secondary weapon system as well. The plasma rifles or the smart missile systems seem to be the most common picks over the fusion blasters. Riptides are quite nice in that they can be really flexible with that Nova reactor though. Provided your suit hasn't taken too much damage, you get your choice of 1 of 3 very nice buffs. A 5+ feel no pain, which is a rather nice durability boost. A really big movement buff with its boost, which could potentially get you move, shoot, move, and hide out of line of sight if needed, or just trade it all in for extra damage dealing, making that scary Ion Accelerator go all the way up to Heavy 8. A very fearsome anti-tank gun indeed there. They do seem to be enormously popular at the moment. 20 out of the 23 lists took at least 1 Riptide along, and a whole ton of armies chose to run the 4-3. It's a pretty good indication that they're one of the most efficient Tau units that they can bring to bear at the moment. Otherwise, for supporting options, perhaps the 2 most common support systems were the Target Lock and the Velocity Tracker, both nice damage increases there. Some took early warning overrides or the multi-tracker beyond that. A couple of Riptides also used the shielded missile drones as well, a cheap little drone to tank a really big hit if you fail your save perhaps. Could be particularly nice if you're hit by something like a Vanquisher cannon and use those saviour protocols. Overall, the big and chunky Gundam suit is very popular right now. Seems like Tau lists are hard to go too far wrong with taking 1 or 2 Riptides along, and potentially even more if you want to spam them. Finally though, while almost every single list uses Riptides, absolutely every list takes a Tau commander of one flavour or another. These flexible veteran XV8s are just far too promising to pass up. Tau commanders are pretty interesting with the amount of buffs they can give nearby units, plus their ability to be pretty spectacular damage dealers in their own right, with some really interesting builds for both roles. Literally every single list took at least 1 generic commander out of the 3 different options. Many lists chose to run 2 of them using that heroic support stratagem, so paying the additional command point for another one, or just taking 2 of them without that if you're playing Farsight. Out of the ones taken, 22 of the commanders were Cold Star commanders, 9 of them were Crisis commanders, and 4 of them were Enforcers, so all 3 of them are plays. It does seem that the fast-moving, hard-hitting Cold Star with the burst cannon is the most efficient though. For the Cold Star commander in particular, he costs 120 points, toughness 5 and 7 wounds, and with a really big 14-inch movement. And another big selling point is that high output burst cannon. 10 shots at strength 5 and AP-1 is very good for the 15-point upgrade. Pretty much the most efficient out of any of the Tau Battlesuit weapons that he can take. It often tended to be paired with the 8-shot DW burst cannon, giving you 18 shots at that similar profile, some of them ignoring feel no pains and things. And then on top of that, it was quite common to take them with Precision of the Hunter, allowing you to reroll all hit rolls and also reroll all wound rolls, which is spectacularly nice on that mid-strength profile. It allows them to punch up against really tough things as well as just mid-tier stuff. You can then combine that with your choice of other nasty guns, maybe a shield generator if you want to take 1 of the hard points for that. And for the more aggressive and dangerous commanders, often that Bagel Hunter's plate was quite a good relic. That's a nice durability one that can nullify a save. Other dangerous builds exist though, such as the Onager Gauntlet and Thermoneutronic Projector. That's also very nice for a surprisingly punchy Crisis suit with Precision of the Hunter. And besides that, the Crisis commanders can give some great buffs to Crisis suit units. The Cold Star gets you to advance extra far, so gets your Crisis suits in line of sight. The regular Crisis one gets to ignore the advance and shoot penalty, plus potentially fall back and shoot, so you don't need to worry about that. They all give out their rerolls, and they're a really nice place to have the Crisis Commander type Warlord traits, things like Exemplar of Montcar for extra damage up close, or auto wounding on 6s to hit. Overall, with all the buffs available to them with Warlord traits, prototype systems, and relics, the Exemplars of the Firecast are just seen as far too valuable to pass up in Tau army lists right now. It's very common to see 2 of them heading up just about every Tau army. So anyway, hope you've enjoyed a quick run through some of the competitive Tau units out there right now, plus some of their common selections. Let me know any of your thoughts with using these guys in games of 40k right now. Looking forward to more insights as per normal. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics and check out any of the similar videos in this series. I have made ones for things like Orcs and Custodies, which I'll link down in the video description below. Feel free to check that out if you'd like to see more. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and that's how I can afford to spend the time making videos like this quite so regularly. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, a link is down in the video description. In any case, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.